So the challenge is to get all that extra pieces to make it work for the Jeep truck. So now that we don't need a flat surface anymore because the halo is basically constructed, we need to move all this stuff so we can take the Jeep truck and put it back in the middle of the shop and start mocking up exactly where everything needs to be. The B-pillars here will go inside there, come through the roof and weld to that spreader bar. I think the next thing to do is to pull this down and finish weld all of those joints. So I've welded everything all the way except for these these back corners right here, because I'm not sure if I need to cut these right after this spreader bar or somewhere before it, and able to get the bend that I want in the back. So that means I got to take this driver's seat back out, and while I'm at it, I'm going to do a little bit of cleaning up in here. One nice thing about the Jeep Comanche as opposed to the Jeep Cherokee is that you pretty much have a straight up and down back of the cab, and there's a cross beam that goes across the back corner. Pretty thick, it's about 1/8 inch thick, and this is part of the whole structure for the entire truck. In fact, they say that you virtually have no cab wobble like you would in a Jeep Cherokee because you have the back of the truck right behind the doors. Kind of like a brace for the entire thing. Having this lower beam in there is nice because it'll give us something to weld our plate to. I definitely want to weld some plates to the top of this cross beam here. That way we can weld the plate onto the tube and then weld the plate to the beam. It'll make it a lot easier, and we don't have to come back behind here and weld when we weld all the way around, since it is in a corner. Now I just have to decide where we're going to mount this to the bottom here. So here's the plate that they sent me with this cage kit, and because this hangs over a little bit, about 1 inch, I might cut this, bend it, and re-weld it so that it's an actual angle iron that holds onto this whole section. It would be best to weld as close to this corner as possible to get this tube out of your way, just in case I lean back and I feel it on my shoulder. I think I need to clean up this corner a little bit because there's a lot of sound deadening stuff in there. I'm trying to pick all this stuff out of the corner. It's like this sound deadening rubber or seam sealer that they used in the 80s. You know, it's been on there for, 36 years. It's like a horse hoof or something. I'm having trouble getting it out of there. I have to use a knife. I tried grinding it, it's caught on fire. I tried using a wire brush, it started smoking. It's just, I need to get this out because the closer I can get to the corner with this tube, the better. Just got to work it, put in your little elbow grease. Like I'm imagining there's a guy with a bucket of this stuff. He just pours it in and then wipes it up the wall, or it's like a solid 1.5 inches of seam sealer in the corners of this thing. I'll get that all cleaned up. That way we can slide this tube all the way as far to the corners as I possibly can. I managed to get most of that cleaned out as good as I can, and I have enough surface to weld on now, so I can put this plate all the way to the corner. You can see how it hangs over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark it right here, and I'll be cutting it right there, and then mark it right here, and I'll show you why in a second, because I'm going to make a cut on this That's going to allow me to bend that. Cut along this line, but not all the way through the edges. Okay, so now that we've made a leaf cut, I could put that whole side that we've cut, I could put that in the vise like that, grab an adjustable wrench, and that should bend pretty easy. Just like that. Go about 90 degrees. We've got a bend in there, 90 degrees, and we could put a weld right in that corner. Now this is going to do two things for us. It's going to help this bracket to fit the shape inside the cab, but also this makes it a little bit stronger because we're welding on this plane and then also welding a little bit horizontally. That fits pretty good. I'll be able to weld around all 6 sides of that, and then when I put my tube on right in the middle, I'm a lot closer to the corner than I would have been if I hadn't cleaned that up and bent that bracket. I figured out the easiest way to get rid of all this seam sealer junk is to take a spatula, scraper, putty knife, whatever, and want to heat the knife up and not the actual seam sealer. Once you get that nice and warm, you can kind of cut into it a little bit and then repeat. Do that a bunch of times until finally you've cut all this out of there. And then you can take a wire brush and a scraper, clean out the corner and clean all the paint and everything off of there. Then we'll be ready to weld on our plates. We need to measure for the holes that I need to drill in the roof of the truck, and for that I want to be really precise. I'm going to put this angle iron on this side of this B-pillar, put another piece on the other side of this B-pillar. We're going to measure to make sure that these distances are the exact same on both ends. So the outside here to the outside over here, this is spanning 6.5 inches. But because we want to take a measurement from the inside to the outside, we're going to subtract whatever this measurement is here, 1 3/4 inches. 6.5 minus 1 3/4 inches is 4 3/4. So now that we know that this tube moves over and up a difference of 4 3/4. So 4 3/4 times 2 is equal to 9.5. That number is important because that's how many inches we are going to subtract from the width of where the bottom of our B-pillars are going to be mounted. I just noticed that XO-FAB put a 15 right here at this bend. That's probably because this bend is a 15-degree bend. They probably laser cut these and write on them with a machine, and then a guy can go and line this up and bend it all in one go. That's pretty cool. I've got this tube right where I want it, and you can see that the inside of this tube lines up with the edge of this little pop out, which there are 7 of those because, you know, it's a Jeep. So if I measure from that crease on that side and the same crease on the other side plus 1 3/4 inches, that'll give me the distance between these 2 lower ends from center to center. Now follow me here because this is going to get aggravatingly mathematical. You've got your 2 B-pillars that are shaped just like this, roughly. The distance that I just described inside the cab is exactly 50 inches. Now because these have an offset of 4 3/4 inches, multiply that by 2, and that gives you a 9.5 inch difference between the bottom and the top. 40.5 inches. Each one of these tubes is 1 3/4 inches thick. So that means that the distance between each is 50 inches, but the difference between the center and the center of each tube is actually 60 3/4. And if you add 1 3/4 inches to the top, you get 42 1/4. This number is not important anymore because we already know where we're going to mount the bottoms. This number, however, we need to divide this by 2. So on the top of our roof, which is shaped like this, we're going to mark the center point. So on either side of that center point, we're going to mark 21 1/8 inch, and that's where we're going to drill our holes through the roof. So it appears all that I have to do is find where the middle of this roof is. 21 1/8 this way is, mark that, 21 1/8. Now, this is a lot easier on the Jeep Cherokee because Anthony will email you where exactly to drill these holes. On the Jeep Cherokee, you take the original roof rack off, and then there's bolt holes that you can measure in from. We don't have a roof rack to deal with, so this is what we get. I want to be as close to the edge of this corner as I can. 1/2 inch 3/4 is what? 7/8. So 7/8. That's the center of the hole that we need to drill. Drilling big holes in my roof. I want to drill a pilot hole first because underneath this cab corner there is another piece of metal that holds the headliner in if you had a headliner. And I think it also adds a little bit of structure and it would be good for hiding wires later on. In the sheet metal underneath the roof, I want to make a bigger hole so that we could take those B-pillar tubes and move them in. Not very thick sheet metal on this cab, and that's why it needs a cage to begin with, because the slightest bump on a tree or a rock, this thing's gonna fold like a tin can. On the inside of the cab, where the hole came through, it's slightly more straightforward because all we got to do is make a bigger hole in the bottom, and it doesn't have to be that precise. Okay, I've got those holes cut. I don't want to talk about it. Now these need to be cut down like a lot. So what needs to happen is we're going to throw the halo back up there, space it up to where I want it to be as far as height off the roof goes. And we're going to take a measurement down the hole to this plate, to the bottom of that, and then we'll know exactly how long to cut these B-pillars. I think you can lift it up a little bit, but not too much. Right about there. Just need to take a measurement. It goes all the way down into the cab, sits on top of that plate. This is one of those things that's at builder's discretion. And though I think that this would be okay as far as roll cage goes, I do think that it's a little bit high now that I'm looking at it. So I don't want to see what would happen if I move that forward to there, how that would look. I'd have to throw another B-pillar behind this one so that I have something to connect to. But that's not a huge issue. I don't know. What if we set it there, but we keep it low? Looks different from standing behind the camera and looking at it than looking at it just with my own eyes. Okay, here's what's going on now. I've decided that I'm going to double down because I'm not using the full halo. I have extra pieces of this. I was going to use them to modify this cage, but I put this up here and man, does that look cool. Like, not only will it add twice the strength up there and about 20 pounds to the high center of gravity, but it looks pretty cool. I think that I'll make some pieces to go in between and right next to and on either side of where that tube connects, but I'm gonna go with that. That looks really cool. Who welded this?